Shaun Haney here with Real Agriculture, and I'm joined, of course, by Justin Funk of AgriStudies. Together, we are Real AgriStudies, and we're really looking forward to sharing the results here from a survey that we did in February. Producer perspectives on innovation. Of course, we know in agriculture, we're always talking about innovation. We're trying to drive innovation forward. But what are some of your perspectives, attitudes, and behaviors around this topic? And we're going to hit it from a number of different kinds of innovation angles. Justin, looking forward to jumping into this.
Yeah, you bet, Shaun. So first of all, this one took us a little longer to compile and bring back to you than it would normally. Winter's a busy time of year, as you know, for us in this space. But we also did a series of qualitative interviews. Thank you for those of you who agreed to be interviewed. And I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody on that. We kind of ran out of time, but we hope that next time we need you, you're willing to step up, because we learned a lot of great stuff by having those one-on-one conversations with farmers from our panel. Let's get, though, to the results of the quantitative study here from the survey we did back in February. So we wanted to learn more about how farmers were feeling about innovation, which, is a very subjective topic. I like to think about innovation not necessarily being a specific product or practice even, but more state of mind. And so we turned to you on our Insights panel, and we asked you a number of questions related to your attitudes, your practices, reasons for innovating, barriers to innovation, and another interesting question that we ask is the generational influence for those of you who are on a multi-generational farm. And of course, we share these results back with you so you can see how your thoughts and opinions might compare to your peers. And so that's what you're going to get out of this the next few minutes. So let's start with the very first question that we asked in the survey. And I think this was an interesting one. This was a self-assessment. And we asked you to describe which of the following best describes how you feel you are when it comes to innovation. Are you leading the way? Are you about average? Or you have a long way to go? Now, this one is, again, very subjective. This is how you feel about innovation. But one point that I want to make here is that when you take a look at the frequency of these results, this kind of matches up with just about every conventional adoption curve that we see. And so, I got to think that given it's a representative sample, over 500 of you answered the survey, that this is kind of a look at how farmers are in Canada today with respect to this topic. Shaun, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, and I think a big part of this too is if you think about this as being like a pendulum. Everybody's going to find a different place on this pendulum when it comes to innovation. There's no right or wrong in this case, and we appreciate people doing an honest self-evaluation to try to add a little bit more depth to this study.
Yeah. So on that, we ask we presented you with attitude statements, which we will do on occasion. First one was, I'm one of the first to try new products and techniques. Implementing new production technologies in my near future, adopting new farming practices is a priority. So you can see, for all of these here, there's relatively strong levels of agreement to these. It might be neutral, might be disagree, but, 64, 69, 58% agreeing. Other farmers will ask me for advice. Are you one of those people that others are looking at what you're doing and asking you what you're doing or observing what you're doing? That's always an interesting question, I think, to ask. I mean, we may not even know that people are watching us and what we're doing, and trying to emulate it. This last one, I thought this was interesting, and we're going to get to this when we look at the means here, but the barriers to innovation are difficult to overcome. There's a relative, despite the fact that, some of you feel that you are rather innovative and you agree to a lot of these other statements, there's still agreement to this idea that, yeah, even if there's benefits to it, overcoming the barriers to innovation is difficult. And that's an issue I think that the industry needs to address.
Yeah, and when we're thinking about Canada competing in the global marketplace, making sure that we're always consistently looking at finding ways to reduce those barriers so that Canada can really work at its full productivity and compete in the global marketplace from an export perspective is one example there why those reducing and paying attention to those barriers is so critical.
Now, when we get the answers to those attitude statements, we assign each response a weighting. And so a completely agree would get a 5 and a completely disagree would get a 1. This shows you the the means, if you will. And this doesn't really tell us a whole lot. Overall, there's agreement, not strong agreement, but there's agreement to these statements. But what I decided to do was to overlay this on top of how you answered your self-assessment on innovation status, which is what we call it. And just the observation that I want to point out here is that if you identified yourself as leading the way, you had stronger agreement. If you were about average, you're sort of, middle to slightly agreeing. And if you've got a long way to go, you're more on the neutral to disagreeing. And so I look at this and I just want to recognize and be thankful that you answered the questions I feel quite honestly. And so we
Yeah.
appreciate that. And sometimes it's difficult to say, well, I'm not leading the way on something, or that or even agreeing that something is difficult to overcome. But when you look at the answers, I think that this is a very fair and honest representation of how people think, and that's exactly what we're looking for. Now, Shaun, before you add thoughts on this, just one other thing I want to point out, which I think is really interesting. Look at the last one. Regardless of
Yeah.
how you felt about where you were on the innovation spectrum, really the barriers, how you see those, that doesn't really change. And so innovation status is not necessarily influenced by the barriers. So anyway, interesting observation there.
Yeah, and consistency, right? Like,
Yeah.
so those barriers are real.
They are real. Some people I get are more willing to make that investment in overcoming them, or they have a motivation to overcome them, or capability in some cases, which we're going to talk about here in a moment. Some of the reasons why you innovate and some of the real barriers, like what are the barriers to innovation. Uh, we also ask you, we presented you with some different, I guess, categories of innovation to see where you were with respect to implementation. And so here you are either actively implementing, considering implementing, not interested in a moment, or not interested at all. So, here you got software. Half of you are actively implementing software with another 20% considering it. Whether that be field management software, or if it's accounting software, digitizing the farm. New seed traits, genetics and chemistry, actively implementing was the most popular choice there. New production practices, which we gave an example, it might be like strip tilling or something like that. The use of enhanced efficiency fertilizer products, robotics or automation. You'll see very small number there. Is interesting. Those of you that are in the dairy business were more likely to agree to that. That number jumps up to like 25, 30%. And I can attribute that maybe to the use of robots in the barn. And then data analysis and decision making. So there's a varying degrees here of implementation, but one of the themes is that some of those things have been around for a little longer, as you would expect, a little more generally accepted and being either implemented or considering that implementation. So in looking at that, we wanted to get a better handle on why. Like, why would you implement? And so here we presented with a number of reasons why you might want to implement innovation, improving profitability, improving production, efficiency, managing risk, stewardship, or being on the cutting edge. And you can see the means here again. The actively implementing gets a 5, not active implementing gets something else. You can see that the top three here, and so these were reasons. These were ranking the reasons. So first reason, second reason, third reason. So first reason gets a 6, second reason gets a 5. Okay, that's how we did this one. The first three, the top three, all business drivers.
Yep.
All business drivers. The others, I don't know what you consider these, Shaun, but maybe more like personal or emotional drivers.
Ego, right? So being on the cutting edge.
Yeah, yeah, which would not, definitely clearly the last reason somebody would
And,
want to do this.
and some would call that the bleeding edge, so to
Yeah,
speak,
yeah,
right?
that's right.
So I think this is really good information because this gives me I guess comfort in the fact that people are looking at the business side of this, and and you should be doing that, right? In terms of, hey, we're going to implement this piece of innovation, not because it's cool, not because it looks really good, not because people are going to talk about us in a positive way. We're going to look, it's good for our brand. From a farm perspective, we're doing this because we're actually improving the efficiency, productivity, and we're thinking about the profitability of of this decision. And I think that's really, really key.
Yeah.
Now we're going to get to the barriers in a second, and there's still some hurdles to climb there when it comes to the financial side. But I think this is really refreshing and comforting to see that this is how this slide worked out.
Yeah, you bet. Practical, rational reasons. This slide just shows you the percentage of you that gave anything a one or a two or a three, and you can see that improving profitability was, pretty much by far the most popular number one, followed by improving yield and production, which you would assume would subsequently result in improved profitability, but it was that profitability factor that really carried this one. Um, okay, so the barriers. The barriers, same principle, rank the barriers. The upfront financial costs by far. You think about this, the upfront financial costs are real, right? You make that investment with the hopes that you're going to see some ROI, but you might not due to, a number of factors within or beyond your control. So, that's clearly the first one, and that needs to be addressed. Complexity is the second, and I can totally get this. Like there are some of these things are hard, hard to understand, hard to learn, especially given that all these other things are going on around us. And then you get to the lack of ROI and some of these other ones. What was interesting is that the willingness or desire to change was the least ranked of them. So that's not what the barrier is. It's not a mental thing. It's a real thing. It's the money.
And again, you'll have people prophesize and say, well, farmers don't want to change. Um, this data would speak the opposite. And again, uh, this pounds to the fact that the ROI and the financial cost, the money side of this is not only a reason for someone to implement, but also it's a barrier to not as well.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Good point. Good point. And I think that a lot of that comes back to what I said earlier is that, the profitability piece that comes after, right? After I've done something. The financial cost happens before I do anything, and that can be a very significant barrier for somebody to overcome because it represents a degree of risk.
Yeah.
Um, the last set of questions that we looked at revolved around the influence that comes through innovation. And here we sort of took an interesting approach. We asked you if you were a multi-generational farm. If you said no, it was the end of the survey. If you said yes, then carried on. And we asked you some questions relative to the generational dynamics on the farm. So 70% of you got these next questions. We asked, what generation were you on the farm? And, we've asked this question of you before, but the reason we do it is because it provides a really interesting basis for analysis. And as you can see here, of those that are multi-generational farms, half of you represent a younger generation on the farm. So that means that there's an older generation that you are working with, likely in discussion with when it comes to the types of products you use, practices you implement, etc. And if you're the older generation, there's likely going to be somebody younger on the farm that you're going to have to work with to get these sorts of things done. And so that always creates an interesting dynamic. So here's the question that we ask. To the older generation, we ask you, to what degree does the younger generation influence your decision making when it comes to innovation on the farm? To the middle generation, we ask the same thing, but then to the younger generation, we flipped it around and we ask, how much influence do you feel you have over others on the farm? And as you can see here, that particularly when you look at the top and the bottom, the older generation, half of them, really more than that. I mean, we're really looking like 80% is influenced by the younger generation. And for the younger generation, it's sort of the same sort of thing. There's a feeling that you are heavily influencing the older generation. And so, I'm sure there's a lot to read into that, but it's interesting to look at how closely those numbers align.
And, look, I'm curious, positive influence, like, hey, we should change, or negative influence, we shouldn't implement, right? That's a whole nother deeper dive into some of this. And this is, again, brings home the fact that communication is important on the farm amongst the generations. I do wonder with the middle generation here, if you are the middle generation on the farm, that younger generation may be so young that they wouldn't have influence at this point. That's one question I did have when I looked at this.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, rather quick survey. We explored a lot in it, but those were some of the results. So, I hope that you take something away from this and kind of looking at it as to gauge how you stack up relative to your peers on this. And, one thing I want to emphasize, there's no right or wrong way to look at this. This becomes a very personal, approach to thinking about farm management. It's just really interesting to see, how others might share similar perspectives or different perspectives than you on this. So thanks for taking the time to answer the survey. And particularly thank you to those who clicked that box to say, yes, please contact. Shaun, we had 150 people say, yeah, would love to be interviewed. And we appreciate that. We can only get to so many. I hope the next time we ask that question, you're willing to click that box again, because we will get to all of you, because what that does is it allows us to dive deeper and try to understand more as to what lies behind the bar charts and tell the story a little bit better. So thank you again for your engagement and your cooperation.
Absolutely. If you have any thoughts, comments, questions about what we've talked about here, please send us an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Just as I'm walking through this with Justin, I got a bunch more questions I think we need to include in some future surveys. So, on behalf of both Justin and myself and us representing Real Agri Studies, thank you so much for filling out this survey. And we look forward to doing it with you again in the near future.
Near future, the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index April edition is coming out next week. So please have a look at that in your inbox and fill it out for us, and we'll get those results back to you a little quicker than we got this particular set of data. So anyway, thanks everybody. Appreciate it.
Cheers, everybody.